Congratulations on your recent purchase of TracK-it. It's a product by Rubitracks West Isle Special Projects Limited. In this video, we're going to show you how to assemble your kit that was delivered to you in raw steel form, just like this, that you've had powder coated or painted the color of your choice. It's one of the benefits of TracK-it. It gives you the option of picking your own color, and you get to save some money on assembly while learning how to maintain your tracks down the road. So there's no written instructions for this system for assembly. This is your manual. So we're going to take you through basically the entire process of assembly, and it's not anything technical. It's basically nuts and bolts stuff with basic hand tools that you're going to have in your home garage. So what we have here, we've got the tools laid out that we used in this video. We've got a crescent wrench, 3/4 inch boxed end wrench, 7/16 boxed end wrench, 9/16 boxed end wrench. We've got a 3/16 Allen head socket. You can use an Allen key. We use a socket. 7/16 socket, 9/16 socket, 3/4 inch shallow socket, and then we have 3/8 drive ratchet, little ball peen hammer, measuring tape, and most importantly, we have 1/2 inch drive torque wrench. From here on down, this is all you really need to put your tracks together. In the video, you're going to see that we use this DeWalt nut driver. So to touch on something very important, we don't want you to use air tools. It's very easy to overstress some of the fasteners on your system with an air impact wrench. So these provide ample torque to snug everything, but not so much to over tighten anything. So we endorse the use of these if you want to use them to speed things up. They're absolutely not necessary, but please don't use air. And then finally, the measuring tape and a grease rag. You're going to see in the video we have a couple odds and ends, different tools that aren't listed here, just to help facilitate putting it together quicker. But this, what you see here, is all you need in order to assemble your kit. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me anytime. Here we got it. This is your track you're going to be putting together, Dwayne. This is the same as our Rubitracks. TracK-it is the kit version that you do yourself, right?
Yep.
So this kit comes to you, Dwayne, when you buy it. Comes to you in raw steel like this. Packed on a pallet, right? So part of your responsibility purchasing a kit is you take this and you get it painted or powder coated, or if you can do that yourself, you do that yourself. And then
does it need any special paint or just?
I recommend powder coat. It's far more durable. Automotive paint will work well too. It's a bit more work to do automotive paint, and it's not quite as durable.
Okay.
It's a pretty harsh environment inside a track, so
okay.
So we get everything powder coated and comes out just like that, right? So these tracks, now one of the things that is unique about our track system is it's basically universal. In terms of the kit, at least, none of these parts are designated for like a front or a back or a left or a right. So it's just a matter of how you put them together will determine where they go. So yeah.
So I don't have to look for left and right labels ever?
No, you don't have to look for any of that, right? So it makes it easier for us to ship it in a smaller package. It makes it easier for us to handle it, and it makes it so that basically we don't have to carry as much inventory, which keeps the price down, keeps it affordable. So
cool.
So these are basically all the parts. You got your axle assemblies, you got your hub, your tower, your rails, your sprocket. These are anti-rotation brackets. These are your slides. And then we just got a mess of stuff on the table, the tools and stuff that we're going to be using today. And then we got a box of idler wheels over here. So we've been putting them all together, and by the time we're done, we'll have a track built.
Very good.
So I guess the first thing that we're going to do, Dwayne, is we're going to put the high facts on the rails. If you want to grab a rail, I'll start on taping these. So everything comes pre-drilled, cut the length. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And whenever possible, try to put the hardware with the part that's going to be on it, so it's a little less confusing when you're sorting through the bag of bolts and stuff. So where there is bags of bolts, that's for the attachment points. We'll address that as we're putting it together. But anyway, so in order to put the high facts on, we'll the way I do it's real simple. Just throw a rag on the floor, and that's just so we don't scratch the paint. So put this end right down on the floor and just hold it up.
Okay.
And then if you look at your high facts, you got a drilled hole on one end.
Right.
And taper on the back. So.
And that matches that hole there.
That drill hole goes right there. That's where the bolt will go that retains it.
Okay.
So if you hold it up, and we just put the rag on the floor, just save the paint, right? So you don't scratch it. And then just slide that right on like that. And basically you're just going to push it on until it goes pretty well flush with that. We'll adjust it a little bit to line the bolt up after.
Okay.
And then we'll grab the other one. It's the same thing with these rails too. They're both identical, so they don't care. The rail doesn't care if it's an inside rail or an outside rail. They're both the same.
So I just make sure I have my hole pointed down and just push it on?
Yep. Slides right on there.
Oh, that goes pretty easily.
Yep. So, so we'll set that. Actually, what we'll do, we got to get a couple axles together, so maybe we'll just set these here for a minute, and we'll assemble a couple axles because we'll have to have something to kind of hold it together as we're putting it together. Might as well take the box of wheels over with us.
Going over there. Okay. We need these axles
for a minute. What's that?
You want these
axles?
axles?
We'll bring over a couple for now, and then I'll get the impacts. So we're using these cordless impacts. I absolutely, adamantly advise against using air tools, simply because an air tool has too much power. And the likelihood of over torquing the fasteners is very high. So recommend, if you don't have these tools, use wrenches and ratchets. It's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Just lay it down for a minute, Dwayne.
Okay.
And we don't have to worry about them falling over. This is your axle assembly. It's going to come to you assembled like that. We have the hardware in it.
Okay. So each one comes like that in the box.
Comes like that in the box. We put the hardware in just so it kind of keeps the parts together and you know which bolt goes where. Try to take a little bit of the confusion out of it. So you're going to want to unthread them. And this center piece is threaded. So hold on to that as you're threading them out. Now we're going to ship the system with Loctite. Important to put the Loctite in the thread. So you don't want to put it on the bolt necessarily. I mean, you can, but if you put it on the bolt, it's going to drip off and it's going to basically sweep off as the bolt threads in.
Okay.
So it's a little bit better to put the Loctite in the hole on the thread, and then that way you don't the Loctite is where it's got to be. So want to grab 4 wheels, Dwayne?
Sure.
Grab the rag off the floor. And, okay. So when you're putting these wheels together, basically every one of these bushings is going to get a wheel. And I assemble them with the snap rings. I put the bushing down, the step facing up, snap ring facing up. And the reason I do that is because these wheels can fail if you hit a lump of ice or rock or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And what's most apt to happen is, you imagine this is on the outside of the track. If the impact comes from the side, it will basically pop that snap ring out, and all you'll lose is that snap ring. If I was to put it together the other way, this with the snap ring facing in, and that gets knocked off, it's going to pop off the bearing and you're going to lose your wheel, so you're going to have to go and buy a new wheel.
Okay.
So by doing it with the snap ring facing out, the only thing you lose is the snap ring, and if your wheel isn't damaged, then you just got to source a new snap ring, put it back together, and save yourself 20 bucks. Right?
Okay.
So
that's on the outside wheels.
on the outside wheels. Once we get in between the rails, it really doesn't matter. But the way I do it, just because, is when I'm setting up all my wheels and getting ready to go, I lay out all my bushings. Every one of these bushings, these medium length bushings, gets a wheel, and I always just do it snap rings facing up. Then I don't have to really look at them, say which one's facing up, which one's facing down.
And I just push that on.
Push that on like that, yep. Yep. And then on two of them, we're going to take our bolt and our retaining washer.
Okay.
And drop it through.
Through one?
One of each, yep. You have one, I have one. And then the last is our bushing that has Loctite in it. We're going to pop that in the last, and then we're going to pick these rails up. I'm just going to set this, set these just on the floor beside me for a second while we do this. It's always good to have a couple guys, because you know you don't want this falling off and falling on the floor and screwing up your nice new paint or powder coat. And then grab your parts that you just kind of stuck together. And the first thing we're going to put in.
Is there any time limit on how long that Loctite can stay on there before I screw into it?
No, it's good. It takes about 24 hours for Loctite to set at room temperature.
Okay.
So you've got ample time. So you squeeze that together, and then we'll start by putting it in these holes. I'll let you get your side started first, Dwayne, then we're not fighting each other. So you might lift it up a little bit and then just turn it in a few turns. You don't have to screw it in all the way by hand. We'll use the tools later. And the reason, like, we want to do it by hand to start, because the possibility, if you just put it up against it and you put your tool on it, high possibility that you're going to cross thread it. If you cross thread it, you basically screw that bushing. And unless you bought a spare parts kit, you're not going to have any extra parts in your kit. So we're going to leave that just like that for now, while we fit in the rest of the wheels, because we tighten this up, it's going to make it tougher to get the other stuff in. So we'll fit it all loose, and then once we get 5 axles in, we'll tighten that up. We're going to leave the rear axle and the most forward axle out until the very end when we put the track on. Gives us more room, and then we'll shove those wheels in when we're doing the last bits.
Okay.
So we'll grab the rest of our parts here that we got kind of half-assed thrown together, and do the same thing basically. So I just grab enough for one axle, and
okay, I need that.
That's all right. We'll grab that later. Just grab what you need there out of what's good.
Okay. Get that out of the way.
Did it again. Forgot to put Loctite on that. Where's the
Loctite? It's right here.
Yeah. So we want to make sure we don't forget the Loctite. All the threaded bushings. I'll put a dab on yours. And turn around. A dab on mine. And that'll go in between. Another wheel, another bushing. A shorter wheel.
Yes.
going? You shove your bolt through more.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little too far. Take your bolt back up just a little bit. Good?
Yep.
Just lift up on my rail just a little bit. Sometimes the weight of the rail make it a little bit tough to thread them together. So if you pick it up just a hair, it'll make it a little easier to get things started. And then we'll put in 2 more axles here and here.
Okay.
And then we can cinch that stuff down.
Some Loctite for me.
Be easier, Dwayne, if you put the assembly together like this, you put your threaded piece and your 2 bushings and 2 wheels. Sometimes it's easier just to drop it in as an assembly like that.
Okay.
Yeah, just pull your bolt back a little bit. Drop her in and then feed your bolt in. Oh, you got one there? Okay.
I do.
Perfect. Just gonna put the Loctite away for now. So you got an impact, Dwayne?
Yep.
So righty tighty, lefty loosey. Don't have to hammer on them because we're gonna torque them. We just want to snug them up.
Okay.
So just yeah, hold the center and. Very best.
This one's
There. This one's not in, Dwayne. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, that's good for now. So now is the perfect opportunity to put the bolts in your slides. We could have did it a while ago, but it's just a little easier to get at when they're up here and kind of sitting like this.
okay.
So what we need for that is the bolts. So in this bag of bolts, for each track, we got these chamfer head screws here. 2 of them are going to have locking nuts, so they have nylocks on them. 2 of them don't. So these 2 we'll save for later. They're going to hold the sprocket on. These 2 are actually just a little bit longer, so we use them to hold the slides on. So then we need a wrench and a socket. So I got the wrench. We can actually use that little impact to do them.
Okay.
That's 3/16 Allen head and wrench, and we'll use that little impact. This one right here. And I'll give you a bolt and a nut. These 2 are actually just a little bit longer, so we use them to hold the slides on. Okay. So you're going to feed that up through the hole, and this way you want to line up that high fax a little bit. So just tap it one way or the other, and they might be a little bit stubborn to thread in with your fingers, so I just spin them in a little bit. Just enough that you can get the nut on, because if you put it on, if you thread it in all the way, it's going to make it tougher to get the nut in the hole. So then we put the nut in. Yeah, a little bit more, but there, yeah. And then start the nut. You probably won't be able to hold the nut with your finger because it's an eye lock. And then we'll just take the wrench and stick it on there, hold the nut, and then you don't want to hammer them in with this, because this has got way more power than it needs to be for this. Basically, you see this little air gap here between the high fax and the rail?
Yes.
Just tighten it enough till that air gap goes away. Like that.
Yep.
And that's all you need. Perfect. You don't have to worry about Loctite on these ones. Basically, any fastener that we have that has a nut is going to be a locking nut. So there's no need for Loctite on any of that stuff. So the next thing we're going to do is the track adjusters. We're going to put those on. And there are 2 of them here. 1, 2. And the same thing, they come with the hardware already installed in them. So just thread those nuts off those bolts. And then you want to put it in these 2 holes here from the outside, with this bolt, the adjuster, facing towards, this would be the front of the track.
Okay.
So put them through like that. Start your nuts on. And then I'll get the other socket. And a 7/16. And then that same impact I just had.
Straight over here, Scott.
Okay. So we're just gonna snug these up.
And how tight do those go?
They don't have to be super tight. They're not a structural part. They're just used for adjusting. So you just want to make them snug. If you go too hard, you'll end up twisting the bolt off, and not that's the end of the world, but do it the other way here. It's a little hard to get the socket on. Like that. Like that. And then same thing here. A little tight with these long shanks. Nice to have a short shank. That's basically, it's solid, it's good, it ain't coming off. Okay, now the next thing we're gonna do, Dwayne, is we're gonna put the tower on.
I'll go grab that.
Yeah, grab the tower and I'll grab the bolts.
Which side does this go on, Scott?
It doesn't matter, and that's again, right now as you're looking at this can be a left or it could be a right. We put it together, these rails are the same, so it doesn't matter. So as you're putting it together, you're just gonna choose which way you put that rail. So you stand back at it and you say, okay, I'm building the track for the left-hand side of the 4x4, so obviously, you know, the easy way to tell which side is which is the sticker, right? The TracK-it sticker on the tower is going to face outward of the vehicle. So if this is outward on the front left side, if you can imagine, then you just set it on with the...
So you would see that if you're looking at the truck.
Exactly, yeah, you would see it. And then we're going to put it in with this grade 8 hardware, 1/2 inch with 1/2 inch stover nuts. So these are a different style of locking nut. Those have nylon in them. These actually are formed in order to bind on the threads So again, we don't need Loctite on these because that Stover does what the Loctite does. So I'm going to feed these in and feed them in from the outside and just start some nuts on them, just so that tower doesn't fall off where you're grabbing everything. And you don't want to tighten any of these until we get them all in, because if it was to like tighten this one and this thing is, you know, not in the right spot, then you're not going to be able to get the bolts in the, you know, the holes.
Yes.
By getting them all in there, it's going to help align it. You got enough nuts for what you're doing?
I do. So there's 6 on the tower side and 4 on the knot. Okay.
Yep, 6 on the tower side and 4 on the opposite. And these are, if you're doing this by hand, these Stovers bind very hard. You're going to have to put some muscle into it, and you're going to be inclined to just run to the toolbox if you got an impact. And want to do that, I strongly advise that you don't again, because it's far too easy to over torque the fastener, and we don't want that to happen. Because then they'll break and you'll call us up and say, what the heck happened, right? So another little tip, you know, you're standing on the outside, you got your tool, you're inclined to put it on from the outside and start spinning. For cosmetic reasons, you don't want to do that, because by spinning this socket on the outside, you're more than apt to scratch up your powder coat and stuff around the socket and leave marks.
Oh, okay.
So what we generally try to do is hold the fastener with a wrench on the outside and tighten it from the inside, because if it does get marked from your socket on the inside, you're never going to see it, right? So, and then we're not just going to do all these, right, because it might tilt or whatever. So we're going to do one here, and then you want to do 2. Basically, we just jump around, and that kind of makes everything go in the right spot. And again, there, now, see, that's an example of what I meant. Like, see that little mark the socket made? So, yeah, that's another thing too, is the wrench. You want to make sure that it's not against something when you're doing it, because
Yeah, I screwed that up.
it'll stay there. No worries. And
I almost did that wrong. I almost scratched my own thing.
Yeah. And you don't have to hammer them right tight. You're going to torque them to spec after anyway. So I'll do a couple more on my side here. I'll probably do all of them on my side, and then you can finish your 2.
Okay.
All right, you do your 2. So I'm going to give you a little explanation of torquing a fastener.
Okay.
So a lot of people have the misconception that basically what you're doing is you're turning that bolt. And the harder it is to turn, obviously the tighter it is. And all you want to do is make it hard to turn. And that they consider that's torque. And that's why they think if you hit it with an impact, well, it's tight, what's the problem, right? That's not actually what you're trying to do. When you turn this, the torque spec that's given to you by the manufacturer of the bolt, in this case, this bolt is 90 foot-pounds of torque.
Okay.
So what they do in the lab is they take this and they put a bushing in it or whatever type of media, and they'll twist that and twist it and twist it, and they'll measure the resistance of the twist, right? And what they're actually doing on a thousandths of an inch scale is causing that bolt to stretch. You're basically pulling the both ends of the bolts apart. And then what that does is it provides a clamping force that squeezes the parts together. And that's what you're actually trying to achieve with torque. Since there's no way to actually really measure your bolt to see how much is stretched, they give you a torque spec because they know that this much rotational force equals this much stress. That's optimal for the bolt. And the reason you don't want to over tighten them is basically your bolt has tensile strength, and that's you know how hard it is to pull apart, how elastic it is. And if you over torque it, you'll overcome the tensile strength and cause that bolt to yield or stretch, which will reduce its clamping force, and you'll actually end up with a bolt that feels tight, but it can fail over time. So that's the whole principle behind torquing a bolt, and why you don't want to use an impact wrench on them, an air impact. So next we're going to put on the anti-rotation. Normally when we're putting these together, Dwayne, we'll put these together as we're assembling the frame assembly, but just to be a little bit simpler and clearer in the video between left and right, we're going to show you how to do it after you've decided which side of the vehicle this track's going on by putting the tower on. So these will go opposite the tower.
Okay.
And the orientation of these again are bidirectional. They don't care where they're at. But what you want to do is when you're putting them on, you want to have this group of 3 holes. Those are your adjustment holes for when you put the anti-rotation links on.
Yeah.
You want to put them as far away from the center of the track as possible.
Okay, so pointing outwards.
Pointing outwards, yeah. Those 3 holes should be as far. And you'll see this hole in the frame.
Yes.
This 3rd hole is where this fastener is going to go in.
Okay. So it has to be kind of, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's going to be attached to 3 points. So in order to do that, we're going to back out these bolts again and feed them through this. We're going to leave the retaining washer in the wheel, and then we're going to feed that over the retaining washer, put the bolt through, snug it up, and then we're going to drop our bushing in with the bolt, put the nut on it, and then we'll tighten that all up together.
Okay. So I want to back out these 2.
Yep, back them up. Show me a bolt. Usually what I do is I just drop it through the hole and then do that one. Perfect. And I'll take the bolt and then we'll just feed it back in here. And same deal, just feed it in. Don't use the wrench, just feed it in by hand first. And get it till it's 2 or 3 or 4 turns.
Want to lift that rail for a minute?
Yeah, that should be good for the moment, Dwayne. We'll not even tighten it up yet. So we're going to take this bushing, this spacer bushing, and oh, we're on backwards.
Oh, I screwed up, sorry.
That's probably me that screwed up. I was standing at the front thinking I was putting the front one on. So, and show me your bolt. I'll put that back in the wheel. There you go. And we'll feed these bolts in here. Okay, just finger tight, and we'll wait until we get this bushing in. So this 3rd bushing, or this 3rd bolt, is just a bit extra structure for this, because when your track wants to rotate, in order to keep the track from hitting the body, there's going to be a chain that connects to one of these 3 holes to a component on the suspension.
Okay.
So we want it to be as strong as possible so we don't rip it off. So this, you'll have your 3 adjustment holes, and then you got another hole that's just a little further apart that's going to line up with a hole in the frame. You're just going to take this bushing that came on the bolt, put it in there, put the bolt through, put it through there, start your nut on, and then you can tighten everything up right there. So, now this one, you see I'm just being anal here, but I don't want to scratch these up, so I'm just kind of holding my socket out from the part a bit. There's no place to put a wrench on there, so now here, because we can, we'll hold it there with the wrench and we'll start it in here. And then we'll do it once more right here. And same thing, this with the 3 holes facing toward the end of the track. I'll take my bolts out, drop them through those two holes. Get it lined up there. Try and get it started. We're just gonna slacken one of these off here. Just make it a little easier to get things lined up. One, two, and then our bolt. I'll drop that in there. Okay, I'll start by tightening the axles. Got a little bit of misalignment here. So I'm gonna get that wheel. There we go, the wheel was off the step. All right, Dwayne, we're gonna put the hub together next, so we're just gonna set this on the floor out of the way because we only have one workbench. And we'll grab the hub and wanna lay the rag out there, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And we need, so this is your hub. Another feature of this hub that makes us unique in the market. You notice how the holes aren't evenly spaced?
Yes.
And we're the only track system that does that. And what that allows us to do, basically on SUVs and pickup trucks, you have two possible lug counts. You have a 5 lug and a 6 lug that are evenly spaced. So historically what we had to do was make a hub with either 5 or 6, which limited you down the road from putting them on something with a different count of lugs. By making these asymmetric or unevenly spaced, it allows us for clearance for either lug pattern. So this track is truly universal with only the adapter portion that would be specific to either 5 or 6 lug. So like I said, down the road, if you want to put them on something else or you want to sell them to somebody who has 6 lug but you have 5 lug tracks, then all they need to do is get the adapter that bolts onto here.
Okay, so this itself, does that bolt onto my truck?
This doesn't, no. There is a 2-piece or 2-inch aluminum adapter.
Okay.
That will have this pattern with the studs. So that will bolt onto your vehicle and that will be made for your vehicle. And then this is universal. This will bolt onto it. And like I said, that allows us to accommodate 5 and 6 lug vehicles with only one part.
Okay.
And opens up your options. So we're going to start by putting our bearing and seal in on the big side first. So your bearings come and they're already pre-packed. We put the grease in for you. We don't want to burden you with that. And it's fairly simple. See, the grease is already in it, right? So I just spin it a little bit, get the grease around. We're going to put lots more grease in a minute anyway. And we'll just drop that right in there. All right. The next part will be the seal. So this is your seal, and if you look at it, you got a fairly open side and a brass colored side, I guess. It's the brass colored side that you want facing you. So that's basically just going to fall right in that and go up against the bearing. Now I got a little hammer somewhere right here. So we're going to tap this in with a hammer, but you want to be careful not to pound on it or hit too hard in one spot because the hammer will dent it. Okay. Actually, if you look in the bottom drawer, Dwayne, there's a rubber mallet there. That's probably a better choice. So we'll use the rubber mallet, and we're just going to go around that seal evenly. Basically just tap it in till it's relatively flush with this surface. So you can feel it's kind of sticking up now. It's a little bit tough to get the last with the rubber hammer because the rubber hammer's hitting here and stopping. So we're going to use this little ball peen just to finish it. As long as you take your hammer and you hold it, you know, so that you're tapping partly on that face and partly on the seal, you don't have any risk of driving the seal in too far. Because if you do drive it too far and you have to pull it out, you're basically destroying that seal. So it's
So I basically want it to feel the same way all the way around.
yeah, you want it to feel even all the way around and flush with the surface. So look for any high spots and just tap them in and you're good. So the next thing we're going to do is in between the seal and the bearing, there's a void there.
Yes.
So we're going to fill that with grease to start. So we ship white grease with you. This white grease is a lot better for cold weather. So this is what we recommend to use, and this is the grease that we use in all the tracks that we assemble. And just a paint stick from the hardware store is about the easiest way to get it in there. Just take little dabs and just pack it in.
Is there any such thing as too much grease?
Too much grease, yes, there is such a thing. We'll address that when we go to put it on. Relative to this part, no, you want to get as much grease in here as possible into this little void. So you want to just keep packing it in until it basically won't take any more. Just like that for now. And then we're going to flip this over. Now this is kind of an important part here because that's greased already and it's sticky. You don't want to just set it on your workbench because you might pick up some debris or dirt.
Okay.
So we're going to use this plastic bag. I'm just going to lay that down there as we know that's clean. And we're going to set this on the plastic bag. And the next thing we're going to do is in between the bearing races. So there's going to be...
What's a bearing race?
This is the bearing race, this steel insert.
Okay.
That's what the rollers of the bearing roll on because it's a very hard steel, very durable steel.
Kind of angled in there.
It is. It's called a tapered bearing. So you set your bearing. Basically, your free play or your preload is determined by this bearing, and that's the keeper. That's what holds it together. Both of these are angled opposite each other. So the more when we put the nut on, the more tighter you make the nut, the more secure they are. But anyway, that's gonna drop right in there. But before we put that in, we want to fill that void with grease in between the two bearing races.
The whole big center hole in there, everything?
Only up to that bearing race. We don't want to fill up here because we got to do more work up here.
Okay.
After.
So from the bearing we just put in all the way up to the new bearing race, we got to pack it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll again take our thing and pack it in there. Want to get as much in there as we can because once we get the second bearing in and get it on the spindle, we're not going to be able to put any more in. Now some people say, well, why don't you have a grease nipple and put the grease in after? And the primary reason is, the reason we don't have a grease nipple is, and back to what you said, over greasing. We put in enough grease that we believe for the reasonable life expectancy of the track, this grease should last that long. It should never need to be refilled. And what will happen is, if you go and try to add more grease to this, and basically all the free space is already full of grease, it has nowhere to go. So what it's going to do is it's going to squeeze out wherever it can, and it'll apply pressure to that seal that we just put in, and that'll cause the seal to fail, and before you know it, you're spraying grease everywhere. So that's the primary reason why we don't put a grease nipple on the hub, just to prevent that from happening.
Okay.
So you can see there, we've packed it, but we didn't pack it solid full. We left a bit of a hole in there, right? Because when we drop it over the spindle, we need room for the spindle to come up through.
Okay, it's going on the part we put on here
It's
earlier.
going on the part we put on
the
there,
track
right?
earlier. Okay.
So, and now, so the next thing, I guess, we'll take this and we'll set it off to the side for a moment. We'll put that track on. Just, yeah, that bag there. I'll just set this over here for now on that bag. And then we'll, we'll just clear this off for a moment. We don't put that small bearing in until after we put the hub on the frame. Just gonna make things a lot easier. I'll probably wipe my hands off here.
And this rubber ring?
That O-ring will go on at pretty much at the end of it there. So now I believe we've got another grease rag here. I'm gonna take a clean grease rag, and because when we put this on this time, we're gonna lay it with the spindle facing up, and we don't want it to get scratched, right? All right, Drain, next step is we're gonna lift this back up on our bench and we're gonna put the hub on the spindle. And we're gonna lay it down, and we put this rag down here again, like I said, because this part now is gonna contact the bench and we don't wanna put a scratch or anything on it. So we'll cushion it there, right? So we're gonna be working right here. So this is the spindle. We ship the towers with this plastic spindle protector on it that protects it during shipping, and also when you get these things painted, they're going to want to sandblast them. So basically all they have to do is just leave this on when they're sandblasting, and this will protect the spindle surface inside, because you don't want that to be it.
What happens if that spindle underneath there gets banged up or damaged?
If it gets banged up, it's got to be fixed. So you gotta assess the damage and repair the damage, and that probably wouldn't be fun, so you want to keep that on there.
So after we get it, we should keep this at all times in case we need to repaint it.
Yeah, you can put that. That's basically just a piece of ABS pipe with a cover on it with a hole drilled to fit over the spindle. 2-inch ABS fits over the seal surface. So yeah, so we're going to get this ready. We're going to wipe this off a bit. I'll take this rag here. Clean that off, because there's probably crap on it from every step in between. Make sure there's no dirt, because you don't want any dirt to get in with your bearings and stuff. All right, now we'll grab the hub that we put the grease in, and now you'll see why. Take that plastic bag off. You see why we left the void in the middle, because this spindle's got to go up through the hub and it needs room, and if we fill that full, it just blob it all out. So we're going to let this on slowly and try not to push too much grease up. And after we get down a little ways, we're going to just spin it a bit. That'll help kind of distribute the grease a bit. I just keep pushing it down until it's all the way down.
And when do I know it's all the way down?
When you can't push it anymore, basically. Just keep spinning it, and then you can look down here, basically. Well, my finger, everybody's got different fingers, but that should be about 3/8 of an inch space there. But it'll find its own place anyway, but you get it down as far as you can. Wiggle it if you have to. Now, if you look inside here, we got a pretty good pack of grease. Can you see that? But if you look down in there, there is still a little bit of void maybe, and you might have a little pocket of air or whatnot. Maybe sometimes you don't get quite enough grease in there. So we're going to add a little bit. We want to fill that right up between the bearings. And this is, we're just using a grease gun. You can pack it in however way you see fit. You can just take your grease gun and, stick the nozzle down there and pump it. I made this little thing. It's basically part of a grease needle, and I put a piece of 1/4-inch plastic line on it, just because I do this every day and I want it to be easy. So I'll just take this and squeeze some grease down in there. It helps get it kind of to where it has to go. Right? So that's pretty much all we got to do there. And then we'll take this bearing, the smaller of the two bearings that we had a while ago, and this is going to drop right in there now. And you're going to want to push that down, and you're going to push some grease out of the way when you're doing that. Some grease is going to squeeze up, but that's perfectly fine. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is when we took the spindle protector off, we had the nut and the washer holding it on. I'm going to use this nut and washer again. So take this washer, and it's got kind of a sharp side and kind of a rounded side.
Yes.
I put the sharp side down. I don't think it really matters, but just drop that down, and that will go up against the bearing. And then we'll take our castle nut and start threading our castle nut on. And now, before I put this on, I guess I should show you something else. Our castle nut has 6 positions where the cotter pin can go, or
yes.
Basically 3, because it goes 3 orientations. And most spindles only have 1 through hole. So you might be here, your nut might stop there, and you have to loosen it too much to get the pin in, or tighten it too much, right? So our spindles have cross drilled. They have 2 potential spots. So that kind of gives us, I guess 6 positions.
Less room to move.
Yeah, it gives us a finer, more accurate
tension.
Yeah, like we can position this nut for the appropriate tension as opposed to having it too loose or too tight in order to get the cotter pin in. So let's thread that in there. Just thread it on with your fingers. And then I just use a crescent wrench because it's easy. You can get a socket, use a big socket to fit in there. But this doesn't have to be tight. If you actually wrench on this thing, what'll happen is you put too much friction, too much pressure on the bearings, and immediately you'll burn your bearings up. So what you want to do is just snug it.
So you finger tight it and then just go to the nearest hole?
Kinda, yeah. Basically you finger tight it, and then put this wrench on however you can get it in, because we just want to grab it. We don't need a reef on it. And just tighten it a bit and spin the bearing, or spin the hub. That'll help everything. If it's not exactly in its right place, that'll help it get there. And we'll tighten it a little more. But you don't want to go too hard. Like, see, I'm only using 2 fingers on this thing, right? It doesn't take hardly anything to over tighten the bearing. And then basically just snug it up until you can feel resistance drag on this thing, right? You know how it's not spinning freely, right? Yeah. So once you get it there, you're good. So what you're going to do now is you're going to back it off until it's loose, right? And then you're only going to go finger tight, right? And then you want to go finger tight until you line up with the cotter pin hole. So right now, if I go there, I look for my closest cotter pin hole that I can catch, right? So the closest cotter pin hole is basically, we're going to call it this one here. So we're going to back it off, because if you need to go a little bit more to a cotter pin hole, we don't want to do that, because again, you're putting too much tension on the bearing.
Okay.
Too much compression. So we want to just back it off that little bit that is required in order to line it up. And that's perfect, right? So you see now that nut wants to freewheel, right? So if that was too tight, that nut would stay pretty much put. So we're going to line that up. And to stop that from spinning, we're going to use a cotter pin. And that's what this little relief is for in here. So that, because it's pretty tight, right? So you got to get down and in. And you might actually have to take a pair of pliers or something and bend this cotter pin just a little bit so that you can actually sweep in around there. So we'll just take it like that, and tweak it a bit with our hands. So we got a little curve in it. And then we're going to feed it down through here. Right? Where's our little hammer at? We'll take our hammer. Be careful not to whack the hub, because there's going to be an O-ring going here in a minute. So just kind of coax it in there. Like that. And then take that cotter pin and put it all the way through. And then I'm just going to use a pair of vice grips. You can use a screwdriver or whatever you want to do. And just take that cotter pin and bend it around.
Does it matter how tight that cotter pin is to the nut?
No, not at all. That cotter pin, all that's doing is preventing this nut from going any further either direction.
Okay.
That's just a keeper, right? The only thing that you don't want to do is when you're bending this is you don't want to bend this cotter pin up so that, like, say it's stuck out past here.
Right.
Because that's stationary and this turns, and when
It's
we
gonna
put
groove on something.
Yeah, exactly. When we put the hub face on, that's going to scratch into it, and it's going to put debris in amongst all your bearings and stuff. So you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that that's pushed down, and then as long as it's spread out wide enough that it can't come through and that it's not going to contact any rotating parts, you're good, right?
So you don't want it to touch that inside wall either?
You don't want it to touch that either. You don't want it to touch anything that moves.
Nothing. Okay.
Right? And it shouldn't. It should be just the right length that it doesn't. And if you're nervous, just bend it around
a little bit more.
A little bit more. And Bob's your uncle, as they say. And then we need our O-ring.
That's right here.
O-ring's right over there. So now this little groove. So most often, you know, you put a hub on a wagon or trailer or whatnot, it has this cover, right? So what we've done is we've eliminated that cover, and now our sprocket has become the cover. And it gives us a nice smooth surface. And in order to keep the grease in and the dirt out, we have to seal it. We do that with this O-ring. And that O-ring just drops right in that groove, right nice, and it'll actually kind of, you know, drop right in there. And we've pretty much got it, right?
So those O-rings, can they be bought somewhere else, like
Absolutely,
at a local hardware store?
Yeah, I don't know about a hardware store, but an auto parts store for
Auto
sure.
parts store.
Any industrial supply. It's just a generic.
It's a generic one, okay.
Generic O-ring.
That helps keeps it.
Bring yours in.
The maintenance easier.
Exactly. Now we've got a big airspace here, and we're going to want to leave some air. So you're saying about over greasing, right? You want to leave a little bit of air for like temperature expansion. The grease will grow or shrink based on as the hub or bearings heats up.
Okay.
So we've got a pretty good airspace, but we want to put a little bit more grease in there because we just want to make sure that we have enough. So we're going to take our tube of grease again. Actually, our tube of grease is over there. And we'll just put a couple dabs in there just for a little bit of insurance, right?
So that'll suck down into that bearing if it needs
Yeah, it'll take it as it needs it, and it'll just kind of be a reserve of grease, I guess you'd say. Just tuck that down in there. A little hard to do with this, but it will achieve what we want. So that's probably all kinds right there. Now we got a bit of airspace. We'll call that good. And then just take our rag, and it really doesn't matter as long as the grease is contained within the O-ring. You're never going to see it, but just because we want to do things right, we're going to just wipe a little bit of this off where the two surfaces are going to go together.
No, if I did leave that in there, what happens? It just
Nothing.
gets squished back in?
Yeah, it's just going to end up being grease between the parts, right? If you had grease and it went outside this O-ring, eventually you're going to see like an oil blotch or some grease squeezing out here, and it's just going to look ugly, right? So this O-ring keeps the grease contained within the hub, and like I said, keeps the dirt, water, everything out.
Okay.
So now to seal that off, we're going to put on our sprocket, or as you called a while ago, the hamster wheel. That's pretty much what it looks like. So the orientation of this is fairly straightforward. You look at it, it's wider on one side and thinner on the other, like the offset. Rather than tell you which way that goes, the very easy, simple way to tell is these two holes. You'll see how they're counter drilled. They got a chamfered seat.
Yes.
And that's so that this bolt will go through that hole and be flush.
Okay.
Right? So we're going to put that with that chamfered hole up. And we should have one more bolt like this. Is it in our bag? Right there. Got her. And bring the Loctite.
Okay.
So what we're going to do now, these chamfered holes are going to line up with these two threaded holes, and it can go on this way or 180 degrees, right? Because this is symmetrical side to side, so it doesn't matter just as long as those two holes line up. So you want to set it down. You don't want to do it here and slide it because you're going to scratch the other side of it. So you want to set it down as close to you can to where you can see those threaded holes. Right, and then line it up. And then we'll put a dab of Loctite on each one of these because this should never need to come back off. And then start it in. Actually, it's probably better to put the Loctite in the hole if we can get it on the threads. Squeeze a little dab in there. And there's the Loctite. We'll put this one on. And then we need the Allen head socket for the impact.
And these are the same size as the other ones we used?
Yeah, uses the same ones, 3/16, I believe. Is that what it says on it?
Yes.
Yeah, 3/16 Allen. So we'll just put that on there and then just hammer this in. Snug that one. Snug that one. Go back to it again, give it another couple oogas. And these don't need to be torqued. Basically, all these do is holds this assembly together while it's off the vehicle. When it goes on the vehicle, the studs actually go through these holes and clamps the whole assembly together, and that's where its strength comes from.
Vehicle.
Yeah, this just prevents this from falling off while it's off the vehicle. So it's not critical that that be torqued.
Okay.
So that's basically what you need to do in order to get the hub on. Right, and make sure that it spins freely. If it's not spinning freely, then you obviously got your nut too tight. You should probably pull the cotter pin out, back the nut off, and go through those steps again to reset the proper load. But that's spinning good, so we're happy. So now the next part is, Dwayne, we're going to put the track on.
Okay.
Ready for that?
Sure.
So we're going to leave this. Actually, probably the best thing to do with this, just because of where we're at. I do it on a bench, but we're going to set it on the floor just because it's stable and it's probably a safer way to do it for somebody who doesn't do it every day, so that the whole thing doesn't wind up on the ground on you and scratching all your paint. But what we want to do is lay it on a rag again, because that painted tower is actually going to be
Touching the floor.
touching the floor. So I'm just going to set it on that rag. So I'm going to grab one hand on the sprocket, one hand on there, and we'll lift it straight off. Careful not to drag it. And set it so that tower portion is on the rag. And then you're good. All right. So now we're on to the track. So this is our track, Dwayne. This is this particular model is 121-inch Camoplast, or Camso, I guess it's called now, Durasport 3/4-inch lug. We sell this in 121-inch or 136-inch long, and we also sell it in this Durasport, or the other is Ice Attack, which has basically little studs in the cleats for gripping into the ice and has a bit taller lug profile.
Okay.
But
So you can put a studded track on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we sell it with studded track. A lot of guys that are ice fishing want the studded track so that when they're trying to pull their shack out, that they'll bite into the ice, give them a bit more traction.
Okay.
Now, the next thing you're going to look at, you see these arrows on here?
Yep.
Right? So that's the direction of rotation of the track. So this track, you know, has a forward rotation and a rear, and you don't want to put it on backwards. So basically, if you're looking at the track, let's lay this down for a second. Just for visual reference, we're going to take this and stand it up just for a second. So we're looking at this track. Let's look at it from the other side here. All right. This is the front, or the side, I guess. We know this is the front, and the way we tell it's the front, well, if you can't tell by looking at it, the adjuster is on the back.
Okay.
Right? So we're going to call that the front because, well, that's what it is. And so what we want to do is have that arrow, when the track is on, the frame, we want that arrow pointing forward from the top towards the front. So this is the front. If we look at the track from the top, we want the arrow pointing forward.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
So we're going to lay it down, keeping that in mind for when we lay the track on. And we're going to take this track, and I recommend when you get your kit, before you do any of the painting and any of that stuff, it's a good idea to take these out of the box and just let them relax, because when they're in the box, they're all coiled up tight like that, right? And they have some memory.
Okay.
So if you leave it out of the box for a few days, it'll help it relax, and it'll make this part a little easier. So now we're looking at this arrow.
Yep.
And we want it to point forward over the top, which means we got to put it on like that. And we're just going to wiggle it on. And we want to be careful, just hang on.
Yep.
See these metal clips here?
Yes.
That's what keeps you from driving out of your track. The Hyfax rubs up against those clips. But when you're putting it on, if you're not careful, that clip can actually gouge your powder coat or your paint.
Okay.
So you want to be mindful of those clips when you're actually slipping them over. And you don't want to go down too far on one. You're going to kind of work it around. So you're going to get it down in there. And then you're going to go down about the same amount there. And then you go to the front. And we'll do the same thing here, keeping in mind that those clips aren't catching. And then we'll go a little bit more here first, Dwayne.
Okay.
So that it doesn't bind. We'll go down a couple more teeth. And then we'll just keep working our way around. You do yours. Drop it down a little bit, and I'll do mine. Drop it down a little bit. Same thing here. It's I'm not going to say it's a two-man job, but it's definitely easier with two sets of hands. So you do more there. And there. And one more. So you'll know you're down all the way. Basically, these lugs will be inside the idler wheel.
So the steel on the track, that thing you told me about, they're always touching steel somewhere. They're touching here and they're touching here. So that's how I know I'm on?
Yeah, so right here, while they're touching steel, basically the easiest way you know you're all the way down is, well, this lug is touching the face, so it can't go down any further.
Right.
And the window, the edge of the window is basically in line, right?
Okay.
So that tells you you're down far enough there, and here, like I said, the lug is
It's on the inside of the wheel.
Inside of the wheel. So when you stand it up, if you're not exactly right, you'll know, because it'll be more track sticking out on one side than the other.
Right.
But you try to get it as close as you can. So that gets your track on. So now we're just going to stand it up, and careful, like when we're standing it up, it might have a tendency to want to fall out of the track on that side. So we're going to try and prevent that just by taking it easy. And then it should drop in place. If it doesn't, just adjust it a little bit. And that's half the battle there. And then what we're going to do now for final part of the assembly is we're going to set it back up on the bench just so it's a little easier to work on. So we'll wheel this over here. And it's going to be a little heavier now, but we'll lift her up, set it back on the bench. And now this is the point where we put in those last two idler assemblies.
The front and back.
Front and back. And before we do, we want to make sure our adjuster is backed all the way out, because if our adjuster is screwed in too far, it's going to stick out here, and it's going to kind of interfere when we go to put that bushing in.
Okay.
Make it a little tougher. So we want to make sure that none of the adjuster is sticking out on both sides, so it's smooth there. Same on this side. And then we're going to grab the last of our wheels and axles. I think there's one more axle on the bench there, Dwayne.
Yeah, sure is, yep.
And we got 4 wheels, so you're going to need 4 more wheels. Like a bushing fell on the ground here. And assemble them how I told you a while ago with on the bushings with the snap rings facing outward.
Okay.
Stand these up. Snap ring facing up. Yep. wheels will get the bolt and retaining washer. And then this bushing will go in between the other two. Just like that. All right. So we'll do one end at a time. All right. We'll start at the front.
Is front easier than the back, or?
Well, the reason we start at the front is because the back has adjustment. The
Okay.
front doesn't, so if it's going to be tight and a little hard to line up, we're going to have more slack in our track,
For the front.
which is going to make it easier to line up because it's just one hole, right?
Right.
The back has a slotted hole, so you're going to slide this in. Now, if you happen to be putting this together and this thing just doesn't want to go in, you're afraid you're going to gouge your paint, all you got to do is, take your impact again and just back this out a little bit. Like that. See, that just sprung. See how it fell down there? Mm-hmm. And it, like I said, the Loctite takes about 24 hours to cure, so you don't have to worry really about screwing up your Loctite by backing it out. And then you do one and I'll do the other. Are you on her?
Yeah.
Just pull out on the track here a little bit, Dwayne. It's
Sure.
A little bit tight on me here. Oh, oop. Okay. We'll take our impact and we'll buzz them home. And do the ones on your side. So now we're going to do the same thing in the back. I'm just going to set that there for now while we drop that in. I think I dropped my other bolt, or you got it there, do you?
I have it here in my hand, yep.
There should be another bolt in here. So now, yeah, this is the last one to go in. So same thing, we'll see if it's going to drop in nice. If it doesn't want to drop in nice, then we can loosen off one axle. Yeah, and that's what we're going to do. Just loosen this off a bit. That lets the rails come apart, gives us just a bit more room. And then I just want to take a look at this first here, make sure everything's good. And then we'll drop it into the groove of the track and then drop it down between the rails until it pretty much lines up with that slotted hole, and you can get your bolt in. You got her?
Yep.
Oh, we forgot to Loctite that. Just pop it back out for a second. Dab of Loctite there. Dab of Loctite here. I'll drop her into place. You got her? Okay. That's good. So the next thing we're going to do, Dwayne, is we're just going to go over these and make sure that they're all, we're not going to say tight, but snug, because after that we're going to adjust the track, so we don't want it to be able to give anywhere.
Okay.
So I'm just going to once over these. we're not going to snug this back one because we got to let it slide. So we'll go to this side and do the same thing. Now these ones here, so we buzzed them in and they're going to grip right now. They're not tight, but we want to back them out. Like might be easier just to do with a wrench. It might spin too far. Basically, we're just going to back it out a turn or two, and that will allow it to slide.
Okay.
Right? But if we spin it out too far, then it's going to be just a little bit too hard to get back where it needs to go. So we'll back that out a turn or two. And there, now that thing is a bit loose in there. So now we want to set our track tension with these adjusters. So those adjuster nuts, they tend to walk down the bolt, and they'll interfere if we try to tighten that adjuster. So we want to back that adjuster pretty near all the way up to the head. And then with 2 9/16 wrenches and 2 measuring tapes, what we're going to do is we're going to screw these in, which is going to push this axle rearward, which is going to tension the track. And as we go, we're going to continue to feel the track until we like it. And then we're going to measure the lengths of our bolts, make sure that they're equal, because if they're not equal, this side will be tighter than that side and the track won't like it. So we want to make sure that they're equal when we're done. And we also want to make sure that we're tightening them in evenly. Now, if I was to come to this side and try and drive that in an inch or more, it's going to cause that axle to cock, like go crooked in there, and it's going to bind and it's going to tear the powder off and not going to work real good. So we'll get you a wrench too. Okay, and then just start tightening in that bolt. And just, you keep an eye on me and I'll keep an eye on you, and we'll just keep going in close to evenly. It's gonna make a few turns. You probably get it some with your fingers too if it spins until it gets up against the axle.
When I touch the axle, you want me to stop?
No, once you get to the axle, then you just keep going, but just let me know when you get against it, and then we know
I'm
that
against it now.
You're against it now, and I'm just about against it, so now we can start cranking it in. Like I said, just keep an eye on my side a little bit, and I'll watch your side a bit, and if you need me to slow down, tell me, and if I need you to slow down, I'll tell you. It's going to make quite a few turns before we get to where we need to go. All right, I'm getting a little bit out there, so I'll let you catch up.
I'm a little slower than you, Scott. But
That's okay. Now we don't want to use the little impact here, but you can use a ratchet. Speed things up a bit. Another feature you're going to notice, a lot of other track manufacturers, for whatever reason, when they put this in, they didn't really consider clearance, like getting at it. So a lot of times you're going to find that adjuster is tucked behind that bolt. So what we've actually done is we've raised the adjuster up at an angle so that you can actually get at it quite easily. And
am I past you yet?
no, close though.
Yep. Getting tighter.
Yep, so we're still kind of floppy. So there's no tool, at least not at my disposal, to check the tension on a track. I'm sure for a snowmobile, there's a process that the manufacturer and the retailers and service guys use, but for simplicity, the guy putting these together at home isn't going to have access to that tool. So basically what I say is if you've ever checked the fan belt on an older car, you want to get the track to behave similar to a fan belt. So you don't want it to be like guitar string tight, and you don't want it to be sloppy like it was a minute ago. But you want to get, it's still just a little bit too wiggly. And if it's a little bit too loose, what's going to happen when you apply power, the sprocket will actually jump on these lugs, right? So you got to get it tight enough that it can't yield enough to crawl over that sprocket. So we're going to go a little bit more. And we're going to just take as much of the flop as we can out. And you do a little bit more on your side.
I think I'm a bit ahead of you though, Scott.
Are you?
Now look at the size of
Now,
the gap.
this is a good time to use your measuring tape. So take your measuring tape and just, yeah, exactly.
Am I measuring bolt head to thing or?
Anywhere you want, long as you're measuring exactly the same on both sides. So you want to measure to the, let's say, the head of the bolt. So right now we're 1 5/8 inches. I'm going to check my side. Now this measurement that I'm spouting off isn't set in stone. Every track might be just a little bit different. So you really want to go by the tension, not by this measurement in my video.
Okay.
And on my side, I'm actually 1 7/8 inches. So I got to go a bit more on my side. And your side now, you see the difference, eh? My side's floppy, your side's springy, right? And that's what we want, right?
Okay.
Right there. Now, if we were to go like too tight, everything's still going to work fine. But what's more than likely to happen is you're going to cause this track to stretch, right? And there's, if you look inside there, you see all that fabric inside.
Yep.
That's the structure of your track. Like, that's all built into the rubber. And if you pull it a little bit too tight, you're going to cause that to fail. And if that starts to fail, your track will never stay tight. It'll just keep getting looser and looser and looser, right?
Okay.
So you want to get it just enough that you take that flop out, which we're very close here now, but not so tight that, you know, it's going to cause the track itself to fail. So I'm going to take my tape. I'm going to use your tape because it's got better numbers on it. So right now I'm at 1 1/4 inches, and I think I'm a little bit too tight. So I'm going to back out a little bit. Just hold that. Three turns, let's see where that brings us. So I'm inching, gotta go 3 more turns. So, what am I doing here? Okay, let's see what yours is.
My side's tighter.
Your side's tighter, yeah. So you're 1 5/8 inches, and I'm still out too far. I read the tape wrong. So I'm going to screw in just a little bit more. And that's another reason why you don't want to back these out too far, because that can kind of throw this off a bit too. So go a little bit more. Just a hair more. I'd say we're pretty good. What do you think, Dwayne?
Yep, feels the same.
So double check that again. Yeah, it was the same on both sides. So next thing we want to do is these nuts that we spun up.
Yes.
Just spin them down against the adjuster. And basically all that nut is going to do is keep you from losing that adjuster. You're going to put it on there, just snug it a little bit, and that'll bind the bolt in the adjuster, and then nothing's going to move on you. And then for the final bit is all we got to do is tighten our back axle up. We don't want to forget that, because the first mile down the road this bolt's going to come out. So finish tightening that. There, so now we got the track assembled. We only have one thing left to do, Dwayne.
Yes.
And that is to torque the bolts. So the only bolts that we have to torque are these 1/2 inch, everything with a 3/4 head basically. And we have 2 torque specs. So these silver colored, nickel colored, or they're actually zinc plated bolts.
Yes.
They're grade 5 bolt. They're a little bit softer. They call for 70 foot-pound torque spec.
Okay.
Everything with kind of a gold color, that's cadmium plating.
Okay.
They're grade 8 hardware. They call for 90 foot-pounds.
So 70 and 90.
70 on all the silver colored ones and 90 on all the gold colored ones.
Okay.
So, and then we'll set our torque wrench to 70 foot-pounds. Right there. Put our socket on. And then for the 70 foot-pounds, we don't need a wrench because they're all backed. You want to keep an eye on that center bushing as you're torquing. It shouldn't turn because we've snugged this all up, but in case it does, you might have to hold it.
Okay.
But you put the torque wrench on and just go until you hear that click. And same thing with the next one, until you hear the click.
And that means our bolt is stretched to the maximum it should be.
That means the bolt is tensioned exactly to the manufacturer's specification. It's stretched and it has the appropriate amount of clamping force. So it's not a matter of how hard it is to turn, just basically how hard it is to turn translates into how much you're stretching the bolt.
Right. So even though we use those battery-powered impact tools, they still weren't enough to get that down tight enough.
No, that's why we use the battery and not air. We know that, like, you know, those battery powered things are meant for carpentry, basically, for screws and stuff like that. They're not meant for big fasteners, but they have
So they'll put it together for you, but then you need to finish it.
Absolutely, yeah. They help you put it together quickly, but they prevent you from
Stretching.
overdoing it, yeah. Okay. You want to do that side?
Sure.
So again, if our viewers at home missed it, the silver bolts, 70 foot-pounds, and the cadmium bolts, or gold-colored bolts, are 90 foot-pounds.
Gold's worth more than silver, so it's
Gold's
a
worth
higher.
more than silver, a higher torque spec, exactly. So now we're going to take our wrench and we're going to set it to 90 foot-pounds. So now we're at 90. And now, because these have no nuts on them, we've got to hold them. And we can't get at the inside to do it on the inside, so we're going to have to torque them from the outside. And I've found sometimes, especially with the 136 track, this is a 121, the 136 track will have 2 wheels here that if you were to go with just a straight deep socket, it'll actually interfere and you can't really get the socket on.
Okay, so a shallow socket.
Yeah, a shallow socket with a short extension will allow you to tuck in behind that wheel and get square onto the bolt.
Okay.
So you'll put that on there and you'll hold the nut at the back side. Dwayne, if you want to run the torque wrench, I'll be your wrench holder. You might have to, there you go. Oh, just hold on, I think okay, no, you're good. I thought the ratcheting was, okay. Do the, yeah, do that one. Doesn't matter really
So it's not like before where we have to go cross corners?
No, because they're pretty much all where they're going to be now. So, do that one. Go until the wrench clicks, and that's your 90 foot-pounds. Oh, hold on. Okay. Okay, now the same thing with these 2 bolts. These are also grade 8 that are holding on these anti-rotation brackets. So I'll hold the nut, you tighten the bolt till the wrench clicks. And same thing here. Get the wrench on here. Just like that. Now we'll go to the other side and do those. There you go. Which one are you on, the bottom?
Bottom,
one?
yeah.
Okay. There. So there you go. Bob's your uncle again. Your track is tensioned. All your bolts are torqued.
So that's ready to go on a truck now?
That's ready to go on a truck.